mourners! Thank you for tuning in to the Court of the Deadstream. Reading and gaming are two of my favorite activities, and we've got two very special segments for you today to stock your libraries with anticipation for the coming year. I've got some special guests here with me in the studio, Tom Gilliland and Pat Marino, and we have a production sample of Court of the Dead Mourner's Call, which we're going to be unboxing live on camera in just a bit. But first, we have a special interview to share with you. Late last year, the famed comic book writer Frank Thierry was here in the studio, and we caught up with him and Tom Gilliland about the next Court of the Dead graphic novel project that they are working on together. So we're going to share that with you first. Check it out, and we'll be right back. Greetings, mourners. We have an extra special announcement for you today. I've got two special guests with me. Tom Gilliland, Chief Creative here at Sideshow and creator of Court of the Dead. And this is Frank Thierry, famed comic author. You might know him from his amazing 3-year run on Wolverine.
Yes, amazing. I agree with that. Yes,
it's the best run on Wolverine. I mean, let's be honest.
I didn't say it. She said it, but it's not like I'm disagreeing or anything. But go ahead.
So you need to go back and pick that up, and when you're done, you can read Jughead the Hunger and Old Lady Harley, which are both hilarious and amazing books that he's working on now. And he's also working on something with Tom.
Something? What?
Tom,
I
wonder
wonder
tell
here in the
us a
same
little bit
place
about
at the same
that.
time. One wonders, right? So, I'm really stoked because to get the opportunity to work with Frank is a real treat.
Likewise. I'm not just saying that.
So when Mark Orban at Insight Publishing, introduced us, we had a great meeting.
Mark the matchmaker
exactly,
here, creative
totally,
minds.
got us together. Over a little pestilence, which
yes.
Frank introduced me to, and I looking at that right away, I was like, man, this guy gets the anti-hero aspect and the interesting aspect of dragon history and into
By
fantasy
pestilence,
and whatnot.
kids.
Yeah, definitely.
Another great title you can pick up.
Can't go wrong. Zombies, crusades, it's like everything I was.
Church conspiracies, yeah. So buy that stuff too.
I felt like I was set up. Frank's like, show me a book that was like catered for my interest almost exactly.
So speaking of showing things, we've got a little preview image we can share.
So what we're gonna be doing is at the next court graphic novel. So this is going to be War of Flesh and Bone. I think we're looking at a piece of art right now. Yeah? No?
Do some magic hands too.
Magic hands.
So
he does have magic hands, folks.
So there's a piece of art we've had that kind of encapsulates, I think, this project pretty well.
So who are they looking at here in this lovely
image? So
this
is a piece by Ariel Olivetti.
Yeah.
This is a painting that shows Odium, the Juggernaut, which kind of a gladiator Spartacus character in the
Frank and
underworld.
Hulk. Of the
Sort of facing off with
nice.
Mordigul, who is the Reaper General's sort of protege Reaper Knight, who has clearly been tasked to go bring Odium to justice, or to order is maybe the right way of putting it, being the Bone faction.
And Mordigul's no angel either, right? He's kind of
no, he's a bit of a...
He's a freshman
like
playing
on
the varsity
squad.
He's a
bit of a badass.
So, he's got something to prove, Odium's got something to wreck, and those two trains are going to collide in the pages of War and Flesh and Bone when Frank and I get this thing going.
Awesome.
So.
We're going to fuck some shit up. Should be fun.
So Frank, you have fucked some shit up in a lot of different universes. Marvel,
some
DC,
willingly, some not so willingly.
Which one's better, really, right?
Depends who you ask.
Riverdale. So what attracted you to the Court of the Dead universe? How's it a little bit different from some of the other worlds that you've been able to play in?
Well, I've always been a fan of Sideshow in general. From afar, you would always make your annual trek there from San Diego. I would always like, wow,
the Sideshow Mecca.
Yeah, the Sideshow Mecca, exactly. And you see this crazy shit that you guys put together. And it's like, wow, you know what I mean? Look. And so I've always loved that universe. I actually saw the Court of the Dead stuff. I'm like, okay. Andy Smith actually had. We have a mutual friend, my friend Dan Panosian, introduced me to, said, Dan, I gave you a plug, all right? So, all right, you happy I mentioned you on the thing here? All right. So he's an illustrator. Nice. He's talented. I'm also lying about that, but I'm, okay. So anyway, no, he is. But anyway, so we have a mutual friend, Andy Smith, introduced and to me the whole Court of the Dead stuff, and I was like, wow, this is... What the hell is this stuff? You know what I mean?
Dark and creepy.
Yeah, exactly. Like, this is right up, and this is right around the time I was doing Pestilence too. So, I was like, yeah, you want to show them this? Because, you know, I could, like, do that. You know, I have this. And, yeah, it was like, it's an automatic. I was just definitely interested into the Court of the Dead. It very much fits in a lot of my, it's grim, gritty, creepy, horror, people getting killed, you know, high action. It's cool.
Awesome. I'll drink that milkshake of
exactly.
Like the grim and gritty element. You know, there's a big that's the court world. They're trying to do the right thing. They're not exactly the right players for the job, but they're stepping up to the plate. And I think that's the language that Frank clearly speaks and understands.
If you follow my career, I do a lot of villain stuff, quote unquote. I do a lot of grim and gritty characters. I've worked on characters like Wolverine and Punisher, and you know, so I've very much, you know,
the darker side.
The darker side is not totally foreign to me.
Well, plus I think that's where we both, you know, kind of seriously connected on was the aspect of these sort of shades of gray, morality, you know,
flaws. I like flawed characters.
Flaws. That was a big part of our discussion the other day or whatnot, and like. Cool. You know, flawed characters have always been the most, you know, interesting.
Let's be honest.
Again, you talk about villains often, and especially in today's, you know, environments where villains are often getting a lot of press and a lot of light and dimensionalization that like makes them feel certainly more credible, but also they often are more interesting because there's more going on. There's more conflict just within them.
Yep.
And I think that was something even in approaching Court and then trying to think about it for comics was like, well. Court was a little bit of my response to what would I do if I was doing a comic and what would my superhero team look like. So
this is a fucked up Justice League.
Is that going to be the tagline?
This is the fucked up Justice League.
That take there was like, well then, you know, to get a chance to work with Frank, who's like engineered so many effective, you know, anti-hero and villain kind of pieces, was like, this is going to be, you know, the perfect fit in the perfect shoe. So
I think you've answered. My other question was to turn that around and say, Tom, you've worked with hundreds of different artists, so how is working with Frank unique? But it sounds like you guys are in the same.
We hit it off right away. I think me and Tom.
That's always helpful.
So.
But I think what's interesting and whatnot, and getting an opportunity to work with someone who's such a veteran or whatnot, is to get you know, a lot of insight into. From our publisher, right?
Insight Comics.
That's
where you're going to pick it up.
Our editor is sitting right
He's right there, thumbs up.
Was just the insight into the process, which is different. I mean, I've always read comics and done it, but observed in the story or whatnot. Never been so much a participant in like, well, how to use the format or whatnot. So working with Frank has given me, you know, some neat, you know, inside looks into how to do this and how to manipulate the, you know, the equation for best effect.
That's
you know, you can spool story, but then it's like, well, okay, now we got to wedge it into this format. And you know, being such a veteran and knowing how to manipulate this was really interesting and insightful.
That's a really great segue, actually, to my next question, because we had like an all-day kickoff session the other day with Frank here in-house, and you have a really unique way of working. Typically, when you write a comic, the traditional method is very waterfall, right? You do the script, you do the pencils, the inks, the colors. The next stage doesn't start until the preceding one is complete. But you work in the Marvel way of writing comics, which is a little more fluid, and that's how this project is going to run. Can you tell us a little bit about that process?
Well, there's two ways to work. I mean, you work either full script, what we call full script, which sometimes I work as well. But for a project like this, I think the Marvel method works best. And the Marvel method, as taught to us by Stan, God rest his soul, moment for Sam, the Marvel method is you would write the plot first, okay, and then the artist would draw it, and then you would go in and script it afterwards. And it's just, I think that just works, you know, maybe best for this process to just, you know, bang out some of the we have a lot of action here. We have a big. Spoiler alert, there's a big fight scene between Odium and Mortimer, okay? And they're fighting through the realm and they're fucking shit up, and you know what I mean? And that's so we're doing a lot of breakdowns of how that fight's gonna look. And the fight here is gonna look very different. I think than, you know, two characters fighting in New York City, because the realm here is, you know, it's how does a fight like this look in a realm like this? You know, there's different
buildings are alive.
Where stuff is alive, where you go against a wall and something grabs you and starts fucking choking you, and you know, all that shit. You know what I mean? It's less than a typical thing, and we're gonna have a lot of fun with that. So.
Yeah, I mean, this is almost like the scene from They Live that just going to go on.
Yeah, exactly.
So
it is
like,
a long, crazy ass fight scene.
Quick, and people's reactions, but just an endless hammering or whatnot, and also a way to kind of it'll be a neat opportunity to explore the way powers can be expressed or whatnot, because in a very specific way, because we got to move through the narrative, and the narrative is really going to be the fight. So this is going to be a fun aspect to go in and get down into the granular details of like what combat in the underworld can look like with its sort of 360 dimensions, and the fact that some characters can step into a wall and step out from another location and all kinds.
So
of
we kept like adding shit. Like we started like this. It's like, no, let's do this.
This is where we apologize to Mark. I know we had a page count going in at the start of the day.
What page count? Okay,
Then,
whoop, out the window with the page count.
Things that were destroyed
more than one
by
was
the end
my
of the
take,
day.
but
oh boy.
So definitely looking forward to that, and I think that this is going to give us an opportunity to be able to do a lot of those kind of like, oh wait, this would be rad if we did it this way.
Yeah.
Because I think that's when you're doing it full script or whatnot, you're kind of loading the missiles, firing the missiles, and you got to stay on target. This process, is a lot of appeal to myself because there's the dexterity of being able to kind of, just pencil in or work in something. So I hate taking. So being able to put little touches in all the way throughout that really have some meaning or whatnot, and having the opportunity to have, there's some time gaps between all of the sort of goal posting that we'll be doing. So it lets your mind kind of recoup from, you may have shot a bunch of ammo at a certain part of the scene, then now we're going to address something else, and it's 2 weeks later, and you've gotten a chance to recharge. And I think that really helps keep a very active narrative that this War of Flesh and Bone book is going to demand active throughout, and not have us kind of fall into like other certain passive dialogue sequences or otherwise. Everything will be very I think high energy.
Yeah, agreed.
Cool. Thanks, guys. Well, we've been getting some questions here from our audience, so I'm going to pass them along. Obviously, Frank, given your history in the comic industry, some of these questions aren't entirely germane to the project, but I'm going to do my best to spin them so that they are.
I see.
So here we go. Yeah. So Alex is asking, do you prefer powered mutants like Magneto or aesthetic mutants like Carnation? And then I'm going to add the chord ending onto the...
Carnation? What the hell's a carnation?
A flower, as far as I know.
Okay, well, yeah, exactly. It's a character too now? Okay.
Jumbo
I'm up to date on my X-Men stuff.
Maybe more like Dazzler with like visual effects, maybe. More aesthetic mutants. Or,
all right, fine.
Like superficial powers. But I think the question, to get to the heart of it and make it kind of relevant to Court of the Dead, is what kind of superpowers and different magics do you like to write? Are there any particular characters that you're drawn to? Do you prefer... bruisers.
I do prefer characters like. It's fun to write when you're fighting fight scenes. Characters like Punisher, with the physicality, like Wolverine with the claws, just stabbing somebody in the face or whatever. Exactly. Just ripping shit apart. You know what I mean? It's fun to when you're doing fight scenes. You know what I mean? In particular, those are the fun characters to.
They're really visceral.
Stuff, you know what I mean? Get down and dirty and be inventive in some of the fights and stuff like that. So, as far as something like this, that's where this comes into play. We're having a lot of fun with the characters and how a fight like this will look like. So,
yeah. And I'm assuming that's, for you, kind of fun. We always, our statues are amazing, but they're very much kind of a static snapshot. Yep. So to be able to work with an artist who's bringing them to life, and you can actually, see stuff in motion and envisioning it, bringing in some of those other magics and unexpected things. I love that we've brought up the environment, but for the characters themselves, is this giving you a different outlet?
Yeah, I mean, I really love animation, so I think to see things in kind of a Ralph Bakshi kind of a way or whatnot, there's always, those were things that were really, like Fire and Ice and the Lord of the Rings animation were huge impacts on me or whatnot as a young fella. But I think in this book, with it being War of Flesh and Bone, in the mythology of Court, Flesh and Bone are the more physical aspects of the underworld experience, with spirit kind of like the overarching part. So to have two characters that really are rooted in this heavy physicality that also have an ability to kind of dimensionalize themselves and their powers with some of the more supernatural stuff they can pull out of their bag of tricks is neat, because it is rooted in that physicality. It does let us do a book that has a lot of like You know,
High action.
well, you don't have to do all these sort of power abstractions. Like if you're a ghost, you're not really, you know, whatever, you're abstractly touching stuff. But if you're, you know, when you're one of these Reaper Knights, you know, there's a lot of aspects where you're literally kicking ass, you know, fist to fist. And it'll be neat in this book, especially to show, you know, a thin, spindly kind of knight against this giant behemoth, but show how that dynamic works. And it won't always be the small guy having to dart around or whatnot. And, you know, and our big guy has a lot of dexterity. So, you know, that those kind of, we can role reverse some of the physicality as well and throw that around too. Yeah. So I think there's just a lot of opportunities to, you know, explore some of the stuff that has always been, you know, wanting to be let out of the box or whatnot. And this is really going to let that happen because it's almost the entire point of the piece. So.
Yeah, it's a big undefined playground you get to play in.
Right.
And we're going to play in it.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Frank, another question here from Teppo. Sorry if I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Who is the character you most want to write but haven't gotten to write yet?
I had talked about one of the things I would like to do. I told this to Tom, Star Wars. I would like to do Boba Fett, you know what I mean? But, you know, I know that's a character that's sort of, you know, they're very protective of, you know.
He's boxed up.
He's boxed up. But yeah, any of their villains, Darth Vader, Darth Maul, Darth whoever, you know, that's very much in...
I'm seeing a theme here.
Yeah, some Darth thing, you know what I mean, type of scenario. Yeah, I grew up a kid in the 70s, you know, so you always have that. You know, there's other characters too, like Conan. I've always wanted to do Conan, you know what I mean?
Oh, sure.
Yeah, exactly.
That's actually not in the...
Well, yeah,
it all comes around.
Yeah, exactly. You know, I've done about Sonya.
Yep.
So there's certain characters, even like a character like James Bond. You know what
sure.
I mean, it's the characters you grew up with as a kid where, you know, I mean, I've been pretty lucky. I've gotten to work on a lot of the characters, you know, even from my youth that I've always wanted to work on. But there's all characters that, you know, Predator, Terminator, you know, I think people could, spoil alert, you know, what kind of characters I gravitate to, you know what I mean?
But that's kind of the fun of working on an original property like Court of the Dead, because I think you can probably bring some of those ambitions and passions of those characters and insert them here in some of these characters that we haven't developed voice and tone for yet, or just have the start of that. Were there any of the Court of the Dead characters, just kind of looking at the pantheon, that in particular jumped out at you?
I like Kier. Okay.
I think
he's definitely a fan favorite.
Most definitely.
I also like Malavestros because you know he's got like a kind of Deadpoolish. I mean, kind of you know what I mean.
Well, it's kind of the character that was like a writer's character. So it was like, well, this will be. I know this will always be useful to kind of get through exposition or other types of tight spots that are can be dry, but Malavestros can deliver and get us through in a sort of charming underworld kind of a way. And I knew that it was an instrument that you know, other writers that we'd be collaborating with would be able to. It's sort of an X factor that you could always use, and also be a character that was pretty elastic. So you can play with him a bit or whatnot and whatnot. And I never really wanted to write anything where it was so.
He's kind of like, I think like your Crypt Keeper almost. You know what I mean? We introduces this. You know what I mean? So.
Well, he can give context to stuff.
Yeah.
There's a lot of neat ways that he can do it.
Yeah.
So that, and also breaking the sort of fourth wall or whatnot and interacting with the
exactly.
audience, dragging, you know, giving you a window into this world that is, you know, a little bit, you know, flipped and whatnot, and you know, can be helpful to have a tour guide to kind of get you through some of the stuff.
And is there anyone in War of Flesh and Bone that you're especially excited to introduce to core fans? Yeah,
I think the Mortigal character is a character that's gonna have a lot of range in the story or whatnot, and certainly kind of comes trying to step out from you know, one of my favorite characters in the piece is Reaper General Demethyle or whatnot. So to kind of show that, like, you know, this sort of fixtured character that in Demethyle has been like kind of the morale and sort of morality rudder for the underworld, has kind of, you know, a troublesome protege or whatnot that is trying to keep, you know, on the path that he's pursuing, but realizes that, you know, that his path can't be Mortigal's as well, and Mortigal has to find his own way. And so again, just sort of, you know, a nice fertile ground to like have all types of missteps and you know, flaws that, you know, will drive narrative or whatnot. So this character has always been kind of in the periphery. People have seen him. We've done you know, fabulous PF of him and kind of some of his sort of later incarnation of his career in the underworld. But it'll be a fun character in that regard. And I think, you know, something that came up when we were looking through different stories we might do for Court, you know, I think Frank, you're correct me if I'm wrong, but I could have sworn that when you saw Odium, you were like, now that looks like the kind of guy that I would be all about. So, the physicality, I think, of that character came, ripping off. And Odium's 100%. Been a long thing that's been sitting in the back of the box. This Flesh and Bone thing, or War of Flesh and Bone, has been an idea that I've had since one of the earlier times. But this was kind of the pocket that opened up, said, okay, let's tell this story here. It's a nice Underworld Rising kind of a tale. And it also accompanies another big premium format we've done some the actual 3D work on. So this is a character that we did in 3D, we brought to life there, and so to get a chance to be able to tell what's the story behind this premium format piece is another kind of rich reward that will come out of this piece.
Cool. We've got another process kind of based question here for you, Frank. In all the projects you've worked on, do you have a favorite in terms of combination of concept, writing, art, and video? Because you've written for video games and film and television. And
it's all me and Tom were talking about this earlier. It's all different thing. I mean, they're all different muscles. I've been lucky enough. I've worked on video games. I've worked on animation stuff. I've worked with comics, and they all stretch different muscles. They're all different processes. I mean, comics, you're working mainly with your editor, and it depends on what kind of comic you're working on. Are you working on a creator-owned thing? Are you working on a thing for Marvel or DC, which is, at the end of the day, those are work-for-hire things, and those are not your characters. You get to play in that toy box.
There.
You have to give, but they're toys, you know what I mean? So, whereas a creator-owned stuff is a little bit more liberating. But then when you work on animation, you have, whereas comics is mainly just you and your editor and maybe editor-in-chief, whatever, but with animation, you write a script and you're getting back like notes from 10 different people. You know what I mean? It's a very different process. Right. You know what I mean? So you have, and the same thing with video games. Video games, and there's a lot of cooks in that kitchen, and a lot of times you're writing it's a different process because you're writing to gameplay. It depends on what kind of game you're writing. So, again, I've been lucky enough to work in all these mediums. I like them all. I like to be able to do them all. And this is another add this to the list here.
Yeah.
So
They've all got their benefits.
Sort of genre jumping is kind of my interest in the same way. It's like, I love Westerns. I love, some sci-fi stuff. But so they don't have any relationships. So being able to jump around like that, I think, gives you a bigger picture kind of, perspective. And I mean, even just in all the conversations we've had, that's always been kind of what radiated from Frank. That was really fun and really was great to react to. Was that it wasn't like just from a certain pocket of super specialty. It was across a lot of things, and you can speak a lot of language from older films and stuff like that we remember. A lot of the younger folks
back in the day.
So there's a little bit of that shit, but so that makes. Let's make a thought. Anyway. All good.
So we touched on this gentleman earlier. We had a brief half moment of silence for him, but I think timely with his passing. JJ Joe is wondering if you have a story or a moment about Stan Lee that you would share with the.
Okay. The main thing I said. Now I met Stan I was lucky enough to meet Stan a number of times, and I always was amazed how. He was in his for an older gentleman. How, I mean, he had more energy. You walk around. Sure. Look, you do San Diego or New York, you're fucking exhausted. I mean, but Stan would always be like, "Hey, Triple," you know what I mean? Boom, boom, boom. I was always amazed at that. And for Christ's sake, I mean, he was 90 years old. I mean. And he's going flying from country, where all over. I mean, I'm not making it to 90. My lifestyle. I'm not making it to 90. And if I do make it to 90, I'm in a wheelchair with a diaper. Okay, so it's not. It's going to be a very different. You know what I mean? So I was always amazed at and Stan was always nice, and he's always on. But one of the things he told me, and one of the times I met him, was the one character he wished he would have created was Wolverine. And I turned around, I told him, I go, Stan, I think you created enough out there. I think you could have left some. Leave that one for the rest of us. You know what I mean? So, but yeah, I thought that was interesting. That was the one character he wished he would have created.
That's cool though, because being such a,
creative influences like Stan Lee, I feel like when you interact with someone like that, you bring a little bit of that influence with you, and it kind of shapes who you are, and bring that to your projects. And
there's always the moment, oh fuck, this is Stan Lee.
Yep.
It just, and God bless him,
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
Tom, do you have any, creative influences in your life like that you would credit to, you've worked with that have influenced?
Well, I think in like I don't know, I feel like I interact with a lot of people, and so I always get like a little touch from a lot of stuff. And so I think we've had some opportunities to sit with Stan or whatnot, certainly at Comic-Con or whatnot. You're always struck by someone, and I think what always caught my imagination with Stan was this guy was just like a locomotive.
He was. Yeah.
I mean, I think that probably had a lot to do with his longevity. Was the fact that he was just constantly in motion, and there was nothing that was going to stop him.
100%.
And I think that was inspirational, especially when you can look and see, well, what did this radiate to? This is the way this gent has lived his life or whatnot, and the legacy he's left behind is broadcasts just legion of creativity. So I think that was kind of the a nice takeaway from Stan in a kind of collective consciousness way, was that notion of like, well, stick to it and just keep driving towards your objectives with energy or whatnot. And I was like, okay, that's some pretty sound, subtle advice, but the kind of stuff that I think really serves you when you're trying to create something new or whatnot, or you're putting your energy into something. Like, you got to go, all ass, not half. So,
and we're all ass on this one. It's not just half.
The whole ass.
Complete, both cheeks are in this, okay? So you can rest assured.
We'll put that quote on the back of
both
the book.
cheeks. Yeah, both
The
cheeks.
whole ass team.
Everyone's ass is in this, all right? We're all ass all the time.
I appreciate the art.
Well, it's interesting to hear that's like his energy is what resonated with both of you, because you think of creative influences as, oh, this person drew this way or wrote this way and that influenced the way I draw or write, but just to say someone's energy and their energy stream to create has sort of inspired you to create your own things is, I think, a really cool influence.
In a way, he was all Walt Disney. I mean, it's like people like that just don't come around all the time, and I'm happy I got to know him and, enjoy his creations.
Yeah, right. I mean, because the ideas were big and small, but they all had the same kind of energy. Even even the smaller characters always had the same kind of. They radiated like the ones that you knew that he had made big plans for, and I think that was fun. That's the kind of like pantheon kind of thinking that I think I'm trying to bring into the Court of the Dead or whatnot, and it's clearly the influence. Especially with Blast. So, what's your superhero team look like? Well, if my X-Men were the Court of the Dead, they'd,
the fucked up Justice League.
Exactly. Right? So,
giving us a common language to talk about.
Right.
So all that energy that you guys are funneling back into the book, I mean, obviously we don't want to give too many spoilers. Stay tuned to Court of the Dead social media for more, but just on a final note here, I mean, the book is called War of Flesh and Bone. Do you guys want to talk about who maybe wins that war? Any little teasers or hints that you can leave with our audience before?
Well, I think the fun part of this will be the aspect of everyone who's kind of been keeping up with the lore of Court of the Dead knows that Flesh and Bone with the adaptation and kind of law and structure are somewhat at odds just in their general outlook on how to do things. And I think it's part of the conflict that kind of the court has to kind of overcome. So I think that the sort of dual level of how this war is being kind of fought. There's the physical side of it with the characters we were discussing, but there's also kind of there's going to be some insight into the relationship between Queen Gethsemane of Flesh and Chancellor Zyle of the faction of Bone.
There's other stuff going on.
They are moderating the the progress of the underworld to sort of take on the bad guys they're really looking for, but realize that they've got some issues between themselves that have to be kind of rectified. And I think that this War of Flesh and Bone is as much the physical aspect of it as it is the ideology of it and whatnot. And we'll not for nothing, but there's also a little bit of there's a spirit voice touch that's pretty significant in this too. So all the factions will get some representation.
Yeah.
So
there's some behind the scenes shit going on.
Definitely.
Some shady shit. You know what I mean? It's not just a fight. There's some,
Well, it showcases that, like you've got the big scions that run stuff, but you see that wow, they've got a lot of structure underneath them to support them too. And that support structure is another belt of the story that we'll see that how the court fixture characters or whatnot, not necessarily the head leaders, also have a lot of influence on what's going to take place. And you can see the earnest attempt to cooperate to achieve the greater goal or whatnot in the works. And I think that'll be a nice piece in the book that'll give it a little bit of its kind of richness and a little bit of backstop to all the violence that'll be,
so we'll get
the centerpiece.
Lots of high action and also some of the like seedy politics underlying all this as well, kind of in the background there.
A little bit of the dirt.
Yeah, a little dirt.
A little grit,
Get a little dirty.
All right. Well, thank you both
Oh, you bet.
for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back. We hope you enjoyed that in-depth interview with Frank and Tom about War of Flesh and Bone, the next Court of the Dead graphic novel. Couldn't you just listen to Frank talk all day? That accent is so fun to listen to. And you don't have to wait until 2020 when War of Flesh and Bone comes out to read an original Court of the Dead graphic novel story. Court of the Dead Shadows of the Underworld is in stock and shipping right now. So if you'd like to pick up a copy of that, you can go to side.show/underworld novel. I've got Bree here with me today to give you a brief update on some contests we've been running and one we're about to launch.
Hi everybody. So if you've been following us on Facebook, then you'll know that in the faction Facebook groups, we ran a contest this past week. The contest was to compose a phrase or expression in Wisp word, and the Wisp words had to be of your own creation. And you guys all had some amazing ones. I was blown away. The entire marketing department was blown away. They were fantastic, but unfortunately, there can be only so many winners.
There can be only one.
So, in third place from the Flesh faction, we have Haley McIntosh, or is it Macintosh? I'm sorry, Haley. And Haley wins 5 points for her faction, as well as a pin and a sticker pack. Congrats, Haley. Her whispered expression was "Hither thy blissires," if I pronounced that correctly, and it was "follow your bliss." So basically just follow your heart, maybe. In second place, from the Spirit faction, otherwise known as the Best faction, we have Paul Callally, I hope I pronounced that right too, for "Slashed Your Skull," which was hungover. So I particularly enjoyed that one. So Paul,
Nice.
you get 10 points for your faction, as well as a sticker pack and a pin. And in first place, much to Anna's delight, the Bone faction.
Hey!
Frederick Lundger, sorry. Cycled Grist, Fresh Morrow.
Ooh.
Same shit, different day.
Hey, that's amazing.
So Paul, you
Cross
get
stitch that one.
this Comics Omnibus, Grave Tales, and this highly sought after Gethsemane art print. Congratulations. As well as 15 points for your faction,
Woohoo!
which is
Fun faction.
great. So our next contest, stay tuned later today, I will post into the groups. Our next contest is going to be very similar, except a little different. There will only be one winner this time around, and you will get this Poisonous Influence t-shirt, which Tom, I believe, is wearing right now. Great news. and this Demethyl lenticular art print. Can you see that?
Ooh.
Pretty cool. As well as 15 points for your faction. And the contest is to name the Court of the Dead studio. So stay tuned. We'll see what you guys can come up with. And that's that. Congrats to everyone.
Awesome. Congrats, everybody. Thank you, Bree. All right.
Hey, look at us.
Time for the main event. I've got here with me today Tom Gilliland, our Chief Creative Officer and, as you know, creator of the Court of the Dead, and Pat Marino of USAopoly, or just US Op? The Op. Now. We're hip with the new lingo. And designer of Mourner's Call. So for those of you who are not familiar with Mourner's Call, let me give you a little rundown on the game. And also, we are going to do a live Q&A at the end here, so please submit your questions now to Bree in chat. But for those of you unfamiliar with Mourner's Call, this was successfully kickstarted back in April of last year. It's for 2 to 5 players, ages 14 plus. It takes about 90 minutes to play the game. It is a strategic tabletop game in which you are balancing your own personal ulterior objective against. We'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute with Pat and Tom, against the need to balance some meters that affect everyone. And it's already scooping up some awards. It won Best Setting in the 2018 Tentaculade Awards. So we've got the glorious board game board set out here so you can see that glorious award-winning setting. And it was also Ryan's #2 pick. That's Ryan from Man vs. Meeple in the top 20 most anticipated games of 2019. Oh. So let's talk a little bit more and unbox this award-winning game.
Yeah.
We have a a production sample here
This is
with us
this
today.
is the real thing.
And let's talk about right off the bat. We've got one of the exclusive Kickstarter sleeves here. Let's talk a little bit about who did this artwork, and as Pat, if you want to unveil the cover here, who also did
this artwork is by Alex Worley, incredible artist from Italy and whatnot, well known in many circles. Maybe you know him from Rob Zombie album covers, perhaps, yeah. But he has an incredible style that just suits Court of the Dead's kind of dark fantasy to a T. And he's a joy to work with. I mean, his ability to like bring out color, punch, and a sense of like classic fantasy art is just tremendous. And he still paints in paint, which is kind of neat. I'm a little older, so I remember getting paint all over your hands and whatnot, and that's his style too. So that really kind of touches my heart, and I think that's a great way to represent the property.
And I love how colorful it is despite our very macabre subject matter.
Indeed. I mean, he brings that sort of dark, sort of whimsical kind of touch to the.
And we have the custom Spirit faction sleeve with us here, but there's 2 others as well, right?
Yeah. So when you bought in, you chose which faction you wanted. So that was Spirit, Bone, Flesh, also equally represented. Same cool design.
Special message from the faction leader on the back.
Yeah, indeed.
And that is only Kickstarter backers will get those sleeves.
Yep.
Do you want to open her up?
Let's bust this crypt open.
This thing is a murder weapon. I think it clocks in at about like 8 to 10 pounds. It's huge.
Yeah,
heavy.
8.5 or so. It's a pretty heavy-duty box we've got with some.
Check out this inside.
See if we can get the nice box liner there to show some extra detail.
There is no bare cardboard in this thing at all.
Now, I asked for this pattern as custom gift wrap for Christmas. I was told no. But I thought that'd be a nice touch of the
Halloween
holidays.
gifts, Pat.
And then we have our liner sheet here. Now, normally under the liner sheet you would find your game board, but we've gone ahead and put that out on the table already. So we've got one of our lids here. I'll set that aside
Oh wait,
as well.
we
I
have
think
to
you
show
guys
this
are gonna
off.
see
Look
as
at
this
this
goes
awesome
through,
logo
like-
on the vacuum form here of the Court of the Dead.
Oh, indeed. But so like it's
Beautiful
just
piece
it's
of plastic.
the experience of opening this thing is just incredible, and you can play that game too. Amaze your friends.
So Pat, as you're unboxing this, tell us a little bit about the trays. Maybe we can move this over
Yeah,
so we get a top-down
do that.
view as well. Because this was very thoughtfully designed.
Yeah,
Way
so
this all comes together.
as we kind of put this package together, we wanted it to be.
Let's turn it this way.
There we go. We're right set up.
Hey.
No, the world's right again.
we wanted a very intentional unboxing experience. So typically the first thing you'd see is that sheet, and under that translucent sheet, the board is folded up with the artwork on this beautiful board showing through the sheet, which creates a really nice effect. Immediately under that, of course, we just had the rule book, and now we get into our first tray of miniatures. This has another one of those clear lids on it, and this one has some corner pieces here. You can probably see that help keep that board in place, make sure all the corners stay good and secure in the box.
Awesome. And again with the logo, which I think is such a nice premium touch.
And then our first layer tray here features all of the guild figures. And this was designed so that during setup of the game, rather than having to take these out and set them up one at a time on the table, you can literally take it out as is and just set it next to your game board, and all of those pieces are ready to go within reach and nicely organized there.
So much more convenient.
Yeah.
Have them on hand.
Now the next level tray is where you're going to find cards and other components as well. So we have our player boards, metal tokens, some of the larger and special figures, player boards here, and then some more components, ring bases, coins, other aspects hidden underneath there.
Yeah, but show these off, man. These are,
Yeah.
look at these things. So this is your player board. Can we get the top down maybe? Or, yeah, there we go. So look at that. It's super thick, so it's not just a single sheet. The places where you're going to put your markers or whatnot as you're collecting your...
Here, put a few of these.
Yeah.
Listen to that clink of that metal.
So, yeah, aside from all this other stuff, there's a ton of metal in this thing, which is just incredible.
Both literally and subjectively metal.
Indeed. So these keep track of your faction influence or whatnot, but you can see that they're kind of grooved, so the pieces will actually sort of slide along in this rather than just fall off. Later, when you've got other tokens or whatnot, they'll sit inside these recessed trays or whatnot. So it's just like, you know, if you have to move the game for your coffee or beer or whatever you got to do, you're not sliding everything all over, and you know, so mishaps under control.
These are one of my favorite components in the game. It's to have that extra thick and the grooves to keep track of everything and not have it like jostle is incredible.
Well, plus that, you know, no side untouched. I mean, you've got the court logo on the back, you know, and just these great textures everywhere that just bring out this sort of rich kind of, you know, macabre architecture of the underworld.
But let's get back to this tray, because this one is really the masterpiece, the magnum opus. I mean, there's the place for everything and everything in its place right here. And you've got custom grooves in here as well. You want to talk about that with the cards a little bit as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So in this corner here, this is where our mortar cards sit with the a slightly larger well on top of it. That's where the larger court cards go. All of these trays and the inserts for the cards were designed to hold sleeved cards. So we know for some of our collectors, they want to get plastic sleeves on those cards to help prevent any like corner damage and things, especially as they're playing the game and using it. So we were very intentional about making sure we had both the depth and the width and length clearance to hold those sleeves. We also added a lot of finger notches, so it's very easy to get a finger underneath those cards and pull them out. The Wallows cards and ulterior motives that go in the center tray, it actually has like a rocker panel underneath, so you can just tip the whole deck and easily pull it out. So you don't have to kind of fight to get a hand underneath those cards. They just balance very nicely on that panel.
You want to see the fighting for the game board, right?
Absolutely. And then, you know, a nice tray here with the custom dice with the Underworld logo in the center, and then notch trays that help hold all these metal coins in place for the faction coins. So these, as you can see, kind of snap in here so that they hold secure, but then come out nicely. As you can see, we've got nice finishes on these. We use a lot of different finishes on the metals, which I really like. You've got a little more shine on your faction tokens. The Dreadsbane token is a much heavier, more of an antique copper type of look to it. And of course, we have a similar aged finish on the Unity tokens underneath.
Why don't you open that up and take them out and show them off? They're so pretty and they make such a nice sound.
That's what he's doing that. I mean, this Dreadsbane order coin is like, I mean, it's got weight. I mean, so when you get to play this in the game, and it's got, let's see, there we go, some significant elements. So when you're doing this, you control the Dreadsbane guild, which helps you control the sort of enemy raker populace that's going to attack you throughout the course of the game. But you know, just these nice tokens that just like feel like you've got something of significance. It's like just such a great touch.
So we unlocked about 32, I think, stretch goals throughout the course of the campaign. You've kind of hit on a couple of them as well. The extra thick board game, the player boards, all the metal components. I wanted, if we could come back in and have another shot of the dice with the custom pip of the Court of the Dead logo. The trays themselves, I think, were also an upgrade, and the coins, metal, and the different finishes. What else comes to mind were some of the upgrades that we unlocked?
We did extra finishes, so we have a spot gloss UV treatment on the game board, on the game boxes. We increased the thickness and feel of all of the cards in the game. So we tried to plus up every component where we could throughout the production, give everything an in-world feel, and add as many of those metal exclusives for the Kickstarter backers as well. So these are a unique touch that are in the Kickstarter version. So, for example, we had talked about these Unity tokens. You know, in the original version at the start of the Kickstarter, these were chipboard tokens, and we were able to go.
I'm gonna hold maybe your hand out.
Yeah.
You could put them in, and we can
Here,
see a couple of these guys. They're
there.
so pretty. I love the way that they're designed. I mean, they're a coin, but they're kind of unlike any other coin I've ever seen
Like a
before.
quirky currency was what we were looking for.
Hold one up. Oh, okay.
Yep.
If you can hold one. Oh, there you go.
There we go.
Perfect.
So you can see these have
Awesome.
different, you've got the Underworld United logo on one side and then the 3 faction logos on the back. And this was really intended to have sort of that like old pirate coin feel. You know, we felt that was kind of very in world. They have sort of a stamped finish to them. But this really antiqued good look to all the logos. So this is one of those things that when people see the game, they just have to pick up a whole fistful and kind of feel that experience.
Well, I totally appreciate this sort of.
When you've racked up more than a few.
Just like a antiquities kind of touch, which is just so much about the underworld and all of its sort of memento mori collectibles that that the mourners of the underworld are trading in, and it feels like that's an element of the game pieces themselves. So I think that just adds a lot of luster and sort of in-world kind of flavor to the game itself.
It's very immersive.
Yeah, no, I mean, just everything about this just sings with what the design ethic of the property was aiming for. So just to connect the game experience with the story and the feel of the world was obviously an important objective. And I think just amazingly satisfied in all these ingredients.
Let's talk a little bit about the instruction manual. This is also something that was, or the directions, sorry, that was upgraded as well. We've got kind of a beautiful textured finish on the cover. There's full color art throughout. Pat, for someone going through and reading this that's going to GM the game at home, do you have any tips on how to use the manual?
Yeah, I think the way I would recommend approaching it is to do a very cursory read the first time through. The game has some great reference cards in it that help you kind of keep track of the different phases within each round. And so the easiest way to learn the game is to kind of have a sense of what each of those phases are first and how they go in order, and then go back and read in a little more detail how the nuance and strategy of each of those phases works. We did a lot of work with our graphic designer to make sure we illustrated as much of that rulebook as possible, knowing that a big wall of text is definitely a barrier to play, and we wanted folks to be able to get into it. And then my favorite way to teach this game to new players is to play the first round basically open hand. Let's just see how everything works, see each phase once, and then depending on how competitive you are, you can either finish out that game.
Competitive.
Or if you're really competitive and don't want people to have had that like sort of cooperative and discussive nature in the first round, you can reset so that your objectives are secret again and the way it's designed to be played, and do a fresh start, but with everyone kind of going into their first real round of play, knowing how each of those 8 phases loops into the next. But it's really quite easy to learn each phase by itself, one at a time. And it's meant to be intuitive to sort of see how each one plays into the next and the next after that. So hopefully folks can kind of find that, take it in chunks and play it through, and then dive deep and play for the full strategy.
Awesome.
And I love when you're going through it. I mean, it's got the photographs of the exact stage that it's talking about, so that's super clear. It's also got a great pictograph kind of language that once you start reading it, you'll see there's little symbols that show you one of these plus one of those equals what you're doing. So it becomes very intuitive in that regard. But also peppered throughout are little sort of excerpt type things from like the Chronicle of the Underworld, where you get a little bit of lore to go along with what's going on with the rules. So when you're talking about paying the celestial tithe, it talks about why the underworld is sort of enslaved to the celestial host, and why all this soul traffic is happening, that they're sort of enslaved to this process. It talks about the dread's grip as how it's sort of their dark nature, that they're sort of fighting the destructive urge inside them to become more noble in resetting this universe they're working on. So just it gives you like that kind of counterbalance between the game and then context for, well, why is this what I'm concerned with?
This is a good point to transition. You're talking about something, so I'd like to show on screen what you're talking about. So as I mentioned earlier in the game, you're kind of balancing your selfish personal objective against that of stuff that affects the whole group. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that and how the meters play into the game and the board here itself?
Sure. Well, so in that context, the underworld was sort of designed to harvest the souls or whatnot under Death's guidance or whatnot, and that's become the sore point of the universe. They recognize that the mortal souls are being cast to waste in this great war, and so they have this noble goal of resetting the universe and putting a stop to this, but their natures are conflicted. And so they're constantly having to kind of work against their own urges to be either selfish or destructive and do what's best for all. So that gets played out in the course of the game by virtue of there's the celestial tithe meter where you're collecting etheria, which is the sort of soul energy of the universe. And that's being, you've got to meet a certain quota to keep the celestials off your back so you can continue to brew this underground rebellion that's going on in the underworld. And meanwhile, on the other side of the board, you've got the dread script meter. So this shows that as activities start happening, the underworlders, the mourner characters, yourself, and the ones that you're controlling in your little sort of roster of characters. You know, as you start expressing power, you start pushing against your dark nature. So the game play really works between these two sort of titanic bookends of threat. So if you reach the top of the meter, a lot of destructive things are happening to everyone. So there's that great sense of the collaboration between players. So while you're competing to be the MVP of the underworld, you also realize that you can't win if everyone can't cross the finish line. So you got to work together to get that done. And the game board, you know, is a nice, just, you know, laying that out is like the two crushing, you know, rocks that you're in between, and then the beautiful world that, you know, is kind of happening in between this threat.
So the game experience itself, besides being sort of a delightfully excruciating crush between personal and cooperative, it also really kind of mimics experiencing being a mourner in the underworld and the kind of the dilemma that the underworld itself is placed in story and in universe.
Yeah, no, definitely. And, you know, early on, Pat and I, we talked about this a lot. And, I mean, Pat did, you know, you've done an amazing job of incorporating all of those elements of the experience into the experience of the game. So you play in the game as sort of your own mourner persona. You're an influencer. You're trying to do your best to help move, you know, and use your influence to get things together and help the All-Taker or Death sort of create this unity that's required to, you know, put off heaven and hell in this big epic. And so the, you know, everything about the rules and everything about the gameplay sort of supports that premise. And, you know, it's just a great balance of that. So not only is it just a fantastic, you know, game that has a number of hybrid kind of features, sort of dudes on a map, area control, all terms I learned in the course of designing. But it also, you know, every time I play, I feel like, oh, okay, the characters that we're working on, the stories that we're propelling are kind of, you know, playing out sometimes slightly differently on the game board, sometimes, you know, really interestingly in parallel with things we're already writing. So.
Cool. Pat, I'm going to switch gears a little bit. We've kind of like racked up everything. There's players, there's different faction points, there's 2 meters to keep track of, there's Etheria and Souls, and you've got guys out here claiming territory. How do you keep track of all that? Can you tell us a little bit about the system that you devised to keep that not only organized, but pretty visually expedited to keep track of and understand?
Yeah, there's a couple different pieces that go into that. The first is obviously working with everything within the story to make it intuitive. So that's one of the best things about the partnership, I feel like, is designing mechanics that follow the story and make sense so that when a player interacts with icons and different aspects of the game, it follows the story well enough that it just makes sense, that they don't have to kind of second guess. And, you know, throughout the process, we would encounter different things where it's like, well, mechanically this works, but players want to do something else because the story's pushing them in a different way. How do we shift that to kind of make it flow? But some of the things we did, too, to help clean that up is try to make everything very visually clear. So the game comes with reference cards that each player has. On one side, you've got, you know, your round order that talks you through how you play the game, what each of the steps is. The reverse side of that has the full iconography for the game, so you know what all of these symbols mean when you encounter them in other places. You know, it points out that these symbols with a little G on the bottom, those mean guild figures, and which ones are influence. In terms of tracking what's happening on the board, we've added these ring bases, so you know the sort of rust color player here, if they control a figure, they're going to add their base to it, so no matter where it is in play, we know that even though this is a Mortis Knighthood figure from the Bone faction, we know who that figure is loyal to, which player they're serving. And when we do that, we also will mark that that player has a Mortis Knighthood piece right on this track. So we found that when we were resolving majorities of the different guilds and figuring out which player had the most, we were doing a lot of counting around the board, and just simply adding this track made it a very quick thing to say, okay, this player has the most here, you know, maybe white has the most in the Council of Osteomancy, so it helps us resolve those phases as quickly as possible. And that was really an important thing to do because anything that is sort of that like step back and do some accounting in a gameplay is going to take players out of the story, out of the world, and we wanted to keep people as immersed as possible and make each of these sort of checkpoints that we have along the game and throughout the game as quick and as efficient as possible, so that we're thinking about the action and that things are thematic. So, you know, we're resolving who has the most Mortis Knights, and the Mortis Knights are gaining that player Etheria because that's what they do when they're going out and reaping that ethereal energy. So it all makes sense and flows in a way that's pretty intuitive for players.
Cool, cool. Thank you. That's one of my favorite parts of the play too. At the end of the round, you get to kind of like reckon and reap, no pun intended, all the different awards that you've kind of put out there. Let's talk about the miniatures a little bit. We have a ton of components in this game. We've got 115 cards, all with unique art, and 70 figures, so that's no shortage of mourners and characters for you to play. Can you tell us a little bit, Tom, about the 6 guilds? They're color-coded by faction and kind of who these characters are?
So each faction has 2 guilds that kind of are their principal expression of, you know, the sort of politic in the underworld or whatnot. The Flesh faction has the Conclave of Shadows, which is sort of the police force, CIA or whatnot. They sort of serve as the eyes and ears for the court to kind of keep track of what's going on in the periphery of the underworld, whether, you know, incursions from heaven and hell are happening, or they're also on the lookout for you know, underworlders that have sort of crossed the line. There's the Shroud Reeves Coven, which is sort of a sort of witches kind of necromantic organization that helps build bodies and forms for wayward mourner souls that come into the underworld that aren't really tethered to anything. So it gives them a sort of a home to live in or whatnot.
Despite being Flesh faction, I have to admit I have an affinity for the Shroud Reeves there.
Well, sort of be what you want to be, and they, you know, sort of the, you know.
What better canvas than a
cosmetic surgeons of the underworld.
Body.
And then the Spirit faction is represented by the Grave Dancers Circle, which is kind of as a foster Murden sect. These are kind of like sort of clerics, to use a common term or whatnot, in the underworld. So they sort of serve the purpose of keeping spirit and soul-based mourners kind of locked in place. So, I mean, they have a tendency to drift or whatnot, and some become ever more wayward, and they sort of serve as that kind of sort of babysitting or, you know, caretaker kind of role or whatnot.
Project manager.
Whereas the Dreadsbane Order is a little bit more of an inquisition that's looking to kind of root out the Dread's grip and where it is slowly working its way through the mindset of the mourners, and ultimately someone who falls to the Dread's grip turns into a more monstrous version of themselves, which is dubbed a Raker. And so the Dreadsbane Order is sort of looking through the city to make sure that, you know, they're not being
like
capsized
police,
from
almost.
within. Exactly, yeah. The Bone faction that is represented by 2 other guilds. You've got the Mortis Knighthood, which is a knighthood that sort of serves the sort of the dual purpose. They sort of vanguard the harvesting or whatnot and escort, you know, the souls that have been harvested by the Reapers into the underworld. But they also serve as kind of the sort of paladins of the underworld, and they're like the standing army or whatnot, the protectors, if you will. And then the Council of Osteomancy is sort of the fixture of the laws of the underworld that Zyle, the head of the Bone faction, is sort of laid out as a means to create organization so that this you know, rebellion they're plotting has some chance. And obviously organization, close to your heart. So the different guilds then represented by these figures, which then populate the board, and, you know, you control a certain number of them, and you've got a lot of utility in deciding, you know, how you want to build your force of sort of movers. So, and the figures sort of represent in the city and in gameplay the sort of the baseline mourner operators that are sort of serving your purposes and helping you to create the engine to kind of create the unity that makes the game win.
Awesome. We are getting some great questions in, so I'm gonna switch over. Actually, not related to the game at all, but some folks are wondering what happened to your knuckles. Have you been in a fight?
Yeah, I was in a fight with a trash can last night. Sadly, I wish I had a cooler story.
Is there a
You should see the other guy, right?
Oscar took a
Yeah, no, sadly no.
Someone else is asking, Pat, has the gameplay or the rules been tweaked at all since last year? Has it not changed at all?
Nothing's changed since we went to Kickstarter, with the exception of a few updates in the rulebook to reflect the fact that we added, for the Kickstarter version, the 5th player. And so that added a few things, and a few of the stretch goal cards, mourner cards, needed a few rule call-out clarifications. We just wanted to make sure that when playing those cards, if there were any questions, there was a follow-up in the rulebook to make sure everything was crystal clear. So we made some additions for those things, but the overall gameplay has stayed the same.
Cool.
But 5th player add was a really big deal. I mean, I sort of never really stuck with that, but I realized how many games I had that only had 4 players, and we often had that 5th person, and so that really was a major stretch goal, and I was really stoked when that got achieved. But also the 5 players playing the game creates a very different dynamic than whether you're playing with 3 or 4, or even down to 2. But So 5, it's just, I mean, it is pretty
Diabolical.
ruthless because there's, I mean, the resources are stretched thinner. There's a lot of things going on in the city. It really dimensionalizes like the gameplay.
Tom, I'm going to ask you, since the box is on your side of the table, could you grab Death and Malavestros and a Raker so we can get a closer look at those? And while you're doing that, Pat, can you speak to some of the materials, what they're made out of? People are asking the board game, the player boards. Obviously, we've talked about some of the metal pieces, the figures. Could you run through some of the materials?
Yeah, so you know, a lot of the board components, these are pretty standard chipboard, with the exception that they have extra finishes on them. So, you know, obviously, I don't know how well this shows the spot UV gloss on the board to give it that extra touch. The miniatures themselves are a PVC material that we use, and this is fairly standard for board game miniatures of this type. And so we've gone with that finish on those. And then your skulls are going to be metal, so these pieces that notch into the player boards that we talked about earlier, those are a metal with like an antique finish to them, similar to the same material used for the coins. And then for the ring bases for the miniatures, those are similar PVC to what's used for the miniatures themselves. And then I think the last material we have present, because we had to get a little of everything in here, is the tracker pieces for the guild tracker are actually wood.
Classic wood.
Yeah, gotta have a little of everything, right?
Do we get a close-up of Death and Malavestros and the Rakers? They're a little bit bigger. And these are all built at standard miniature size as well, so you could use them in other games if you wanted to, right?
Sure, I'd love to see you invade other games with Core of the Dead stuff.
Have Malavestros pop into your D&D campaign.
Yeah. How does Monopoly work when Malavestros jumps in?
Chaos ensues. Are there plans for further expansions based on some of the additional stories that you're working on?
There's definitely room to do that. There's a lot of time epics in the underworld. This, the Mourner's Call, kind of represents one of the later ones where they're really coming to the quick about, you know, getting to the point where they can face down the celestial oppressor of this time. But there's a number of eras back in time that we've taken a look at, you know, exploring. Other darker moments and that were perils to the underworld that would represent a good way to use, again, same board, same city layout for the most part, but you know, possibly the cast of mourners, which we have our mourner in court cards.
I think someone might have snagged them out of the box before I brought it over.
Okay, clever.
I was going to see if I could get through that.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, good. I domed us out. There you go.
We're missing some Mourner cards.
Anyway,
Yeah, I think someone might have snagged them.
I forgot where I was going with all that chaos. Anyway.
But that's a good segue into the next question. Someone is asking how heavy the box is. Obviously, we're missing a few cards, which probably adds another ounce or two because there are 115
it's a big
cards.
stack deck.
But how many pounds are we roughly coming in here?
If I'm remembering correctly, about 8.5 is the final weight.
It's like a baby. It's
so
a
if you had two,
newborn
you
baby.
just, you know, you can work out. So we're taking care of your health as well as your entertainment.
Getting ready for the afterlife there,
Exactly.
building some muscles
Pump
to
up.
look like an odium. What is your favorite location on the map?
You know what?
Favorite place to go? Favorite benefit?
I am often exploiting the spirit locations. I don't know, for whatever reason, I always end up with that as my prime motivation or my ulterior motive, and so that always plays into my strategy somehow. So Heist Anathem is often giving you, perks that are helping to get more movers onto the board. So that's typically a place that I'll go. If it's this end of the city is generally kind of a sort of drafting more guild movers into your sort of your control, and that's a great way to kind of manipulate the board.
That's my favorite way. More bodies.
Yep.
How about you, Pat?
I would agree early in the game, locations that give you extra guild figures, and then I'd like to try to transition up to some of the sort of headquarter locations for the faction, so like Cryptosakur and Voxing Guard, which are going to help you capitalize and gain a lot of influence for all those figures you've collected. Particularly as the dread script gets high, getting more figures gets more and more difficult without having consequences for everybody. So I'll kind of shift my strategy there. And then I think a lot of times players will overlook Hushhide and Grendel's Pillars because those are some of those locations that help you serve the greater good. And
Funny how that gets overlooked.
yeah. And,
Aw.
but there's some selfish undertones sometimes to those actions, particularly gaining unity, which can be a huge point swing at the end of the game.
Oh yeah, without a doubt. And another area that's fun is and puts a sort of variable into the game is the Wallows deck. So this typically sits up out here, and appropriately so. It represents the outer wilds of the underworld or whatnot. And so the deck is filled with both beneficial artifacts and let's see if I can pull one off here. There you go. There's like the Handmaiden's Pain. This is a mirror. This allows you to do. I'm short my glasses. Remind me, Pat, what we're doing here.
I think this one, if you complete the quest, you can copy the ability of
That's
another
right.
Mourner card. So it's a reflective property of that one.
And you can
Diabolical.
find, so rakers are hidden within the deck, so when you pull a card here, and it's also, you can see it's outlined by purple. Throughout the game, all the colors are highly representational of like themed elements in the world. So purple is kind of the color of the Dread script. You can see that on the meter, you can see that in the raker cards, and even the rakers themselves have that kind of purple kind of cast. So that's how these raker figures are kind of coming into the game when you find those. And there's all kinds of other things where you'll find like interesting nods to locations that are out in the Wallows that will give you different ways to bring in. You can get unity. You can find a lot of resource in doing this. And there's a couple of characters in the court deck like Relic Rablatch that really help you exploit this deck. So if you can draft that in your early draft at the start of the turn, you have a great opportunity to go into the Wallows and come back with some great stuff. The artifacts being really big swing vote elements that you can add to your arsenal. So they're really worthwhile to go after this, and it's always a lot of fun because you never know what you're going to get. Obviously, you're going through quite a deck. So it usually brings interesting things into the game that you don't see, like playing as often as positioning on the board.
Awesome, awesome. Some folks are asking about additions and add-ons. Are there more detailed figures from the different guilds that we might see? Are there other game add-ons coming or in the works?
That would be stuff that we would be evolving as we moved, into next incarnations of what the game's future is going to be. So I think the next phase of that is not so much that is to determining what the potential for, I guess, like a retailer version might be.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something we're definitely looking at right now is what does a retail version of this game look like? So everything for the Kickstarter version is currently moving forward in production. So we're starting to look at next steps for fans, particularly when we know after these games ship, we anticipate hopefully people will play the game, have a lot of positive things to say about it, and there's going to be that sort of FOMO wave of how did I miss out on this? How am I not part of what's going on? And so we were just at New York Toy Fair, and we had a mock-up of an option for a retailer version. Of course, all of the exclusive metal components come out of the game for that design, and are replaced with chip pieces and things of that nature. But we had that on display at New York Toy Fair. And then we'll be in a couple weeks at Gamma, which is an industry show for the board game industry, where we'll be meeting with a lot of our hobby store retailers. And that's really going to help us gauge interest and get a sense of what the demand looks like for this game. And from there, we'll be able to make some really good decisions about timeline and contents for a retail run of the game.
Cool. And when can Kickstarter backers expect to see approximately window-wise their games arriving at their doorstep?
Yeah, so in that area, we are still looking very much on track to ship the games out in May. We have just gotten the updated digital proof from our manufacturer for the last two pieces, which are Kier and Demethyle. So we're going to go through some rounds of approvals, both on first a digital wave, then a physical wave to get those pieces in hand, and so we can all, on sort of both sides, both the Project Raygun and Sideshow side, get eyes on those and get a sense of where they're at. Assuming everything looks good, then we'll be able to go into production with the last two pieces, pack out the games, and get them to our fulfillment partner. So once we kind of have that wave of approvals, we'll have a very clear timeline for production, packing, shipping. So we'll be able to give more specific dates, but everything is looking on track for May.
Because largely, a lot of it is already produced and sitting, waiting to be packed. So there's great confidence in that situation. So I mean, that looks great. And some of the pictures of endless bins of Etheria and stuff on the factory the work floor is always
Fill a
fun to
baby
look
pool
at.
with
Yeah.
souls and get
You're
to
like,
go
wow.
swim
Not
around.
only your single game looks like this, but here's what 5,000 game components look like. So that's pretty impressive.
It is epic.
Yeah, seeing the boxes of like the Unity coins or those big Dreadsbane coins, it's like
It's a treasure chest.
It was. I had sort of a Scrooge McDuck moment of like, can I just like kind of do the little dive in the vault? And, yeah.
They're like, Pat, get out of the bin.
Yeah.
Well, I can't wait to get this in the hands of fans and have people playing the game as much as we had the
absolutely.
opportunity to, because it is quite a lot of fun, diabolical fun. Thank you both for joining us.
You bet.
We had a wonderful Court of the Dead stream today. Reading and gaming, my two favorite things, and it's winter, so it's perfect weather for it. We started off with an interview with Tom and Frank Thierry talking about The War of Flesh and Bone, the next Court of the Dead graphic novel. Very cool interview. Bree gave us a contest update, and stay tuned to social media because she's got more coming for you. And we ended with this live unboxing of this beautiful production sample of Court of the Dead Mourner's Call. Thank you for joining us. Rise, conquer, and game on, folks.